Towson, Baltimore in New Zealand. Appreciate everyone checking in, throwing some love our way on Facebook and on Twitter. But I am back. I decided to take a little mental health away from Indianapolis this week in the NFL Combine, but that will not stop me from discussing the National Football League. This guy covers the NFL for the Bleacher Report. He is out of the fighting city of Toronto, where we'll be fighting with the Blue Jays and perhaps the Maple Leafs and maybe even the Raptors before it's all over with. He is one of our defending champions, and you can follow his journey out on Twitter at Brad_Gagnon. That's Gagnon. We welcome Brad Gagnon back onto the program. Dude, what is up with the new Twitter profile picture? You used to have your pretty girlfriend up there. Now you look like Colonel Mustard in the library and playing Risk or something. What's going on there, man?
It's kind of, in a way, I'm kind of having some fun with the typical. A buddy of mine at Bleacher Report and I were kind of going over the standard, sports journalist Twitter profile pictures, and that you can kind of break them down to a few categories. Now that I think about it, there was the interviewing a big athlete, with your microphone there. There's the I've been on TV shot where you're sitting on, it's a freeze frame from a TV show or a stand up, and there's a bunch of variations. The nice profile pic where you're in a suit. And so I was digging for a new one, and I found myself in a suit in a nice setting and figured, okay, that's appropriate, but let's go with something kind of stupid where I have a ladder covering half my face and I'm drinking a beer so that it's not too much of the uniform cliche that we've come to expect from us in the sports media. So it's kind of just me having a little bit of fun.
It looks like a Diet Pepsi, but now that I've examined closer, it does look like an adult beverage of some kind there, Brad. So
it is.
And you got some Thailand picture up there. I mean, you're mixing things up. I don't mix pictures up on my Twitter. I've had the same Twitter profile. It's my 25th year in Baltimore radio, so I have a 25th anniversary logo. I've just let that sort of stand. Time stands for what it stands for. 25 years of doing something wrong. Yeah, nobody's caught on yet. What can I say? So, hey, man, I was supposed to be at the Combine this week, and I'm with you. It's not the most exciting event, and it is in Indianapolis, and I don't know if you know, but they stole our team, so I'm not usually happy in Indianapolis, although I'm okay with it these days because I've moved on from such things. But, for the Combine and for free agency, this is such a huge, huge time for every team, but it's certainly here for the Ravens, who haven't made the playoffs 3 out of 4 years. They need a lot to go right here. They need to really do well in free agency. They need to really do well on draft day. They need the guys they already have under contract to play better than they've played. But first things first, the Brandon Williams, the Rick Wagner, losing guys is always the hardest part of this week for any fan, I think, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this is kind of the, arguably the calm before the storm, but also sort of a time where you got to go through the bad before you get to the good. And you hope that the good's going to outweigh the bad. And for many teams, of course, and many fans, it doesn't do that. And in many cases, it ends up delivering, and you kind of forget about what you've gone through in late February, when March, delivers on all the promises or all the hope you had regarding free agents that your team might bring in, to kind of make up for the losses. So, we'll see, particularly, how things play out with the Ravens. Obviously, this is a team that, doesn't have a lot of salary cap space. Only a few teams really have less and isn't coming off a great season. The number 16 overall pick is nice, and they have status quo the rest of the way in the draft, but it's not as though they're loaded with draft currency. So, this is a team that, any kind of losses are tough to kind of tough to recover, I guess, to make up for. So it's going to be interesting to see how they get creative with their cash. And how they navigate things in the month of March, essentially once the new league year gets underway. And I guess it's only, 10 days from now, so, that'll be fascinating. But I think obviously Brandon Williams is the guy who, comes to mind. I guess Wagner, I think that line needs to consider some major changes, in a lot of different ways. But I think that Wagner would be a key guy as well. And then, Kyle Juszczyk is another guy who I think had some underrated contributions to this team. I think he's also slated to become an unrestricted free agent. You can probably confirm that. I don't have that for sure, and that info for sure. It might be an RFA, but at the very least, that's a guy they might want to consider taking care of. And then you've also got to think future right now. Jimmy Smith's deal is rather ridiculous. His cap hit for 2017 is $12.6 million. I do have a borderline photographic memory from my Ravens offseason preview from a couple weeks ago. But yeah, so he's under contract, I think, for another 3 years. So, that's someone who maybe you consider tweaking. And then all of a sudden you have a little bit more cash so that you can re-sign one of the guys we just mentioned. So, it's going to be intriguing. It's not going to be they're not going to be the center of attention like a team like Tennessee that has $1 million or $1 billion to spend and tons of draft currency and all that. But there's definitely some major moves that are going to take place in the next 2 weeks, particularly those 3 free agents and maybe even a couple of veterans in terms of, potential contract restructures that'll kind of indicate where they're going to go between now and mid-March.
Well, these franchise tags came into play this week, right? So whether it's Le'Veon Bell or K'Wan Short, obviously Chandler Jones, Kirk Cousins, all these guys at the top, Melvin Ingram as well, JPP up there with the Giants, all falling into that. Then there's the guys like Nick Mangold getting thrown out onto the street. I mean, I think the Ravens are going to wind up putting Elvis Dumervil out on the street. So there's a bunch of guys that are still going to wind up out on the street by the end of the week, so that teams can, free up some little bit of space. I mean, the Ravens don't want to lose Brandon Williams, but I'm pretty convinced he's going to go elsewhere because I think somebody's just going to overwhelm him with money because, to your point, there's $1 billion of available money out there in free agency. The best players are going to get paid. They always do.
Yeah, it's going to be tough to keep. I mean, teams like Baltimore, teams in their financial situation, sort of benefited last year from the fact that Cleveland Browns decided not to participate in free agency despite having so much money to spend. And we'll see if that's the case again this year, but eventually all the teams have to spend money. I mean, there's a salary floor as much as there's a salary cap, and obviously the players are owed their money as the cap goes up and climbs. So the Browns are going to have to spend money. The Niners have so much money to spend. I mentioned the Titans, despite coming off a winning season and having a lot of talent in place, and 2 draft picks in the top 20 have a lot of money to spend. So, we're going to see them. We're going to see the Jaguars, spending a lot of cash. Sadly, if you are a fan of parity, the Patriots have a lot of money, to spend as well. The Raiders. So, you look at all those teams and you think they have a lot of holes, aside from maybe the Patriots, and so they're going to be making efforts, and they're going to it's going to seem like an overpay. That's not even the right word because it's not an overpay. Obviously, whatever you're worth is what you get. Whatever you get is what you're worth, I guess, right? But it's also not an overpay because the salary cap is climbing at such a ridiculous rate right now that it is outlapping our expectations, and it is sort of blowing up what we perceive to be the value of a typical player. So, it's getting to the extent that Kirk Cousins might be worth $25+ million this offseason. And that's the guy who just made his first Pro Bowl and isn't really considered a superstar quarterback. So, if that's the way the trail is blazed, you're looking at kind of a domino effect where a lot of guys like Brandon Williams, who again, not a star, but a talented young defensive player, ends up getting so much money that a team like the Baltimore Ravens, which has only, $15 or $16 million in cap space, just simply can't compete.
He is Brad Gagnon. He covers the NFL for Bleacher Report out of Toronto, Canada. You mentioned something about having money versus not having money. For the Ravens, having these 2 players go to market. We've talked a lot about this week with the 2013 draft. Matt Elam winds up on our WNST text headline for Dealin' Weed. Obviously Arthur Brown never got on the field. Then there are the guys like Williams and Juszczyk and Ricky Williams that did get on the field. Or Ricky Wagner. They did play well. And now you're at that point where you'd like to keep them, but you don't have the money to keep them because you've spent the money in other places. I don't know what's certainly it's better to be the Ravens and to spend to the cap every year and to have some level of expectation that you can win 10 or 11 games than to be a Cleveland Browns fan and say, well, we have a lot of cap space and we've sucked for 20 years and whatever we're going to do with our money is probably going to be the wrong thing to do. And out in the free agent market, I think we've all learned this is not the way to build the franchise by giving Ndamukong Suh, ridiculous money. That makes you better at a position, but long term, that's not the way to win in this league.
No, well, I think it's a little bit of both, right? I think it's for some free agent, once in a while even a splash. I mean, the New York Giants had a borderline Ndamukong Suh level, 3-player splash last offseason that paid off in a pretty big way. It's a big reason why they made the playoffs and their defense.
But that's rare. You must admit that's rare, right? I mean,
exactly what was going to come out of my mouth next is I think those have to be calculated. I think they have to come at the right time. I think it's all about your situation. I mean, the Giants in that particular situation last year, they knew they had the quarterback. They knew they had the pieces in place generally on offense with Odell Beckham Jr. and a young, strong offensive line. And they knew that their biggest shortcoming was defense, and they couldn't really wait 2 or 3 years for draft picks to sort of be groomed under, with Eli Manning aging and all the situations they had on offense. So they went for it, and it did pay off, and sometimes teams go for it in the right situation too, and it still doesn't pay off. In fact, quite frequently, as you kind of alluded to, it often doesn't pay off. But I do think that free agency is better used for sort of, just covering up those tiny holes. It's about just kind of finding the right fit for that leftover, maybe your right guard spot is open and the rest of your line is in good shape, and you want to create some competition with a young guy at right guard. So you bring in, a middle of the pack free agent guard who you feel, based on your assessments, you think is going to compete. That would be an ideal situation for a free agent, and that could be Baltimore this year. I mean, there's a team that obviously lost a star offensive lineman just last year and might be losing a very good offensive lineman again this year. So maybe you just go, you find a few potential diamonds in the rough a little deeper. You kind of, put them up in competition against some of your younger offensive linemen in camp, and you go from there. And that could apply to replacing Steve Smith as well, obviously at the wide receiver position. It could apply to, trying to replace Brandon Williams or Zachary Orr in the front seven, or even trying to, bolster a pass rush that, as much as it's still got some talented players, Terrell Suggs is not getting any younger, and Elvis Dumerville is not getting any younger. So, those types of spots are where I think it's best to have a nice combination of youth and guys who are totally unproven and guys who have done it before and may have a chance to be reclamation projects and are going to come in and compete, and at the very least not cost you the arm and the leg that is associated with an Ndamukong Suh or anyone that we referred to on the Giants, Damon Harrison and Janoris Jenkins and who else was there? Olivier Vernon.
Brad, when we go to the Combine every year, we're talking about quarterbacks, right? Like, no matter who comes by in the Underwear Olympics, the quarterbacks always trump anything, because if you feel like you've got your eye on the next Dak Prescott or Tom Brady, or even if it's, Cam Newton at the top or Carson Wentz last year, whoever it is, the quarterbacks this year, it starts with free agency. It starts with who is going to sign up for Jay Cutler, who wants RG3, who wants Tyrod Taylor, what's Houston and Denver going to do, where's Tony Romo going to show up, what's going on with Garoppolo, is he really going to get dealt? Those are the questions. I think that's the foundational thing. All of the franchises that don't have Tom Brady or Joe Flacco or Matt Ryan or Eli Manning, that they need to work out here first. The quarterbacks, for me, over the next 3 weeks, this is the most fascinating study for all of these teams, because that's going to be the differentiator, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. This is not a typical year for whether it be completely available or potentially available quarterbacks. I mean, usually you don't have anyone, maybe one guy who hits the open market who's worthy of being, signed and who could compete for a starting role and become a franchise caliber quarterback. And then maybe there's a guy in the trade market as a result of the supply and demand dynamics on the quarterback market who becomes available via trade. And so last year, arguably that was Brock Osweiler as the free agent option. And this year we have, 7 or 8 guys who, potentially could be viewed by teams as franchise quarterbacks who are either going to be available in free agency or could be available via trades or franchise tag and trade if it's Kirk Cousins, or being released if it's, particularly Jay Cutler or Tony Romo. So, you've got Romo in Dallas. You've got Osweiler, who could seriously become available after only one failed season in Houston. You've obviously got the situation with Jay Cutler in Chicago. You've got the situation with Jimmy Garoppolo in New England. You've got Kirk Cousins, who's saying apparently that he would only go to San Francisco to reunite with Kyle Shanahan. You've got even Colin Kaepernick in San Francisco, who, probably a guy who should be viewed as a backup for good at this point in time. But, that talent and that history can't be totally denied. And I'm sure that he'd be intriguing for a lot of GMs as well. So, It'd be very interesting to see how this plays out. And I think, again, to go back to that sort of domino effect, I think that's how this is going to roll to an extent, too. Because, for example, if you have Houston say, we're done with Brock Osweiler, we're going all in on Tony Romo, we're going to trade for him or sign him when Dallas releases him. He's coming over, same state, he's going to become our quarterback. We're going to try to win a Super Bowl with him and J.J. Watt in 2017. All of a sudden, Osweiler hits the open market. Jay Cutler likely does. Maybe Osweiler reunites with his former coach, John Fox, in Chicago. Cutler could go down to San Francisco. There are all these different scenarios which are real fun when you try to kind of play it out in your mind in terms of how this carousel can end up turning. And we've never really had a year with quite that many names, especially when you throw in the Jimmy Garoppolo dynamic, where a team like the Cleveland Browns might be thinking we're better off using our first overall pick on a guy we've seen make NFL passes by essentially just trading that pick to the New England Patriots and signing Garoppolo to a deal that would be slightly more, but not tragically more lucrative than the type of deal you'd give to a guy in like Watson in the number one spot. So it's going to be wild to see how it plays out over the next couple of weeks and potentially all the way until draft day.
He is Brad Gagnon, covering all things NFL for Bleacher Report and monitoring all things free agency as we get into the market. I haven't had you on since the Super Bowl, and I've talked a lot about it this week because I took a couple of down weeks. I don't know how the Falcons do it, right? I thought that driving out of the parking lot that night as the fireworks were going off in Houston for the Patriots, I thought, what does one say to Dan Quinn if they run into him on a golf course in Atlanta? What does one say to Matt Ryan at this point? It's going to be very interesting over the next 24, 36 months to see how you respond from blowing a 28-3 lead in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I almost, I used the word in light of when it all went down. I used the word trauma, and I know, of course, it's not the same as trauma the way we all perceive it as human beings. But I think that this for a football player was career trauma. It was something that is really never been encountered to this extent in that type of venue, on that platform, in that type of game, to blow a 25-point lead and under all the circumstances that came with it. I don't know how a team this game is more emotional and more mental, and I think oftentimes we, as sitting behind our computers and in front of our televisions and playing fantasy football, really give it credit. And so, I do wonder how they're going to, essentially recover from the trauma associated with what happened in that football game. And I think it's problematic considering how young they are, considering how fragile fragile is too strong a word for Matt Ryan. He's a good dude and a good quarterback, but considering the fact that he's been criticized greatly in the past for not performing well in big games, and he wasn't there for them in the fourth quarter with silly sacks and a bad turnover, and so, you wonder, how is he going to get past this? He's 10 years into his career now. And so, the young defense, a guy like Matt Ryan, two new coordinators on offense and defense now, it's going to be a really, really wild and that Super Bowl hangover exists, right? We've seen it year in and year out, where at least one of the two Super Bowl teams fails to get back to really relevance almost the following season.
Yeah, Carolina struggled with that a little bit, right, after 15-1.
Exactly. Carolina really struggled with that after 15-1.
49ers couldn't get a yard 4 years ago, and they haven't been able to get up since, right?
Exactly. And even Denver didn't make the playoffs after being such a dominant defensive Super Bowl winner the year prior this past year. So that's just teams that go through regular Super Bowl experiences. Throw in what happened with Atlanta, and this is like a hangover a Super Bowl hangover where you've gone out and taken shots of JD all night without eating or drinking, and you've just, passed out with your clothes on. And that's what the Falcons are going to be encountering, tomorrow morning, which is essentially September the 7th, if they're playing that opening game against New England, in their stadium. It doesn't add up to an overly confident feeling regarding the 2017 Falcons. But you know what? They defied the odds in 2016. They appear to be very mentally strong. So, who knows? Maybe they do bounce back and have a great year and they learn from that experience. And that's, of course, what a lot of us outside of maybe the NFC South are hoping happens, because you would be ashamed to see that team be destroyed by that.
Always great to have you on, Brad. Anything you want to say about a potential Caps-Maple Leafs matchup here? Caps have been looking pretty good since the last time we got together, man, and making deals on Monday night. I know it will all be judged in April and May, but I like the bus I'm riding on right now.
Yeah, I would prefer that bus for the immediate future as well. I mean, I think that Brian Boyle's a nice pickup for the Leafs as well, and so that kind of puts you on a right track where you have a veteran come in with some of the youth that has been very exciting and very inconsistent, of course. The Leafs weren't supposed to be this good this fast, and it's possible they're not even this good, and that it'll take a couple of years before they actually, become consistent and stop blowing 3-goal third period leads and whatnot. So. This is a team that's still a year or two away and is going to go through growing pains, but, it's probably the most exciting team to watch in the NHL, which is at least something that Leafs fans and folks in Canada can take some solace in right now because, again, it's defying expectations at this point in time. I just don't think that it's the kind of thing that's sustainable into April and May and June, considering the youth movement, considering the lack of experience, and considering again the day-to-day inconsistencies that we see with that Leafs team. So, I think I'd rather be on your bus if I were having to pick between the two fan bases. Right now, on February 28th, 2017, or March 1st, 2017, or March 2nd, right now. But I do think that, come next year and the year beyond that, I think Leafs fans are going to be having the last laugh with a lot of the fan bases they're facing right now.
He is Brad Gagnon. That's Brad_Gagnon. You can follow his journey at Bleacher Report. He is the NFL writer there, and still bleeding hard for the Blue Jays. We got our own problems here, dude. Our night at Sky Dome there in October. Buck was down in Sarasota this week trying to wash it all away and saying we're moving on to this year. Yeah, you're moving on, but we remember.
Yeah, that's always how it goes.
Great to have you on, Brad. Be well, man. Take care.
You too. Thanks, man.
You got it. Brad Gagnon of Bleacher Report chatting some NFL there with us. We're going to get some Caps in here. We're going to get some Wizards in here. Certainly some Terps. We got spring training coverage. Luke and I have been monitoring all things the Orioles allow us to see on Masson. And we skipped the Combine this year. Just took a little pass. Called an audible at the 11th hour due to jet lag, amongst other issues, and I'm hanging out here. So check us out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault for anything you missed this week. We're going to get a bunch of NFL Combine guys on next week, which will be great as well. We have the Big Ten tournament next week. We got our London trip on sale under the Road Trips tab at WNST.net, waiting on Green Bay and Nashville and Oakland as well. And head coach Barry Trotz of the Washington Caps will be joining us on March 20th up here in Baltimore to rock our red. We'll also be swabbing for the Bone Marrow Registry. And for There Goes My Hero that night as well. I am Nestor Nasty at WNST.net. Reaches me Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and streaming live on our Facebook Live as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.